Dear friends, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from across the globe. Welcome. Welcome to this presentation, whatever you want to call it, um, on fair tariffs between nations, conducive towards solution of economic problems and establishing a world peace from theoretical and practical points of view based on the personal experiences of Dr. Farzam Kamalabadi. And of course, there is nobody else in the world who's better than Dr. Kamalabadi to talk about this topic. His vast and varied experiences across the globe and across decades. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Farzam Kamalabadi, even though I think most of you may know him. It's going to be a short introduction. Um, Dr. Farzam is a global financier, a master strategist with over 30 years spent in China and an influential figure in both oil and gas industry and the digital economy sector. He is driven by a philosophy of creating a regenerative, healthy, equitable global system bridging the East and the West. On the softer side, he is a master poet in the three classic poetry systems of Persian, English, and Chinese structured poetry, and a master calligrapher in Chinese classic and hieroglyphic complex scripts, and in combination with Persian, Arabic, and Latin. Actually, there is a lot more to talk about and introduce Dr. Farzam, but I'm gonna just end at that part. And it's really difficult to keep up with his accomplishments and all the articles that come out about him. But the latest on April 3rd of this year, that is 2025, the President of the Republic of Botswana, His Excellency Duma Gideon Boko, formally and officially appointed Dr. Farzam Kamalabadi as the presidential envoy on international relations and economic development of the Republic of Botswana. The appointment and mandate letter recognizes Dr. Farzam Kamalabadi as the world's renowned senior economic advisor and welcomes his agendas and initiatives for the transformation of the nation of Botswana in collaboration with the states into a high-income super affluent nation. And just today, 19th of April, an article came out on him, and I would like to read just a part of it. It says President Duma appoints Dr. Farzam Kamalabadi as the Republic's presidential envoy on international relations and economic development, effective April 3rd, 2025. Dr. Kamalabadi is a Persian American with a track record of success in global affairs and economic development. He is well positioned to assist Botswana in achieving its aspirations. And it's a long article, and it really talks about Dr. Farzam and introduces him, basically part of his CV as well. So I don't think I'm going to read the entire article. So with that little introduction, I'd like to welcome, it's an honor and pleasure, Dr. Farzam, to introduce you. So please go ahead. You have 45 minutes or as long as you want to talk. Thank you.
Well, beloved Baha'i friends, and of course, an old-time young friend, Mona Mahmoudi, and my great brother, Iraj, and my teacher, and all the friends here who are so dedicated to the cause of humanity and the destinies that is brilliantly, basically designed by the divine through the revelation of Baha'u'llah for the direction of humanity. So any time that we spend our attention and time, it should be relevant. So I am very pleased by the relevancy of the topic to the realities and the exigencies of the time. As Baha'u'llah says, be concerned with basically exigencies, realities of the time. And therefore, the Baha'is are like the physicians for humanity. They are like the engineers for the re-engineering and designing the systems that are antiquated and are repressive. I mean, not political only repression or basically on the level of religious persecutions. We don't mean repressive that. We mean by the nature of an old world order that is incompatible with the realities of an orderly and also coordinated and well-managed life. And it goes to extremes. The Baha'is are the balancers, the equalizers, let's call it. The Baha'is are called to be the leavens that leavens humanity, the leaven that leaveneth humanity, that is the agent of fundamental total transformation, the transformation of the nations and the exaltation of the nations. So whatever we do, think, breathe, act, and live on this most critical, checkered era of human experience are so decisive while they are divisive. We have a saying, hear no evil, speak no evil, and see no evil until there is no evil. This is my sentence. So we know the world is divisive, but we want to turn it into decisively into a totally new order of humanity that is divine. That's why it is called the divine civilization. That is what is called to bring down the perfections of heaven on earth, so that the will of God, the order of humanity, will be prevailing on earth as it is in heaven. Who has seen the order and the peace and tranquility of heaven? Well, maybe not directly, none of us. But through the revelation of all the manifestations of God, we know and have an inkling. And for that matter, in this time and era, we have a blueprint of exactly how to establish, bring down, draw down, and implement the perfections of the human order in such an enlightenment, such a peaceful manner, such a highest form of material, mental, spiritual, even divine order, that the whole of humanity will act as one. That is what is called the oneness of the world of humanity. You all know better. What I'm saying is that we have been given with a task and assignment to administer to the ailing situation of humanity and bring in the solutions. The dire needs of humanity cannot wait anymore. It is in this regard that the current world disastrous and dismantled, disorganized, highest form of competition, in fact, wars and divisions and disunities, there are practical solutions in the Baha'i revelation that can really shed the light and array humanity in an order where it can be cleaned, as in the Baha'i vocabulary, from the dross and from the what we call the garbages, that is called the dross of its falsities. The world is now filled with falsities, false notions, false ideas, false policies, and false systems. That is why Shoghi Effendi says, leaders of religion, exponents of political theories, governors of human institutions, who at present are witnessing with perplexity and dismay the bankruptcy of their ideas and the disintegration of their handiworks, would do well to turn their gaze to the revelation of Baha'u'llah, because that is wherein the solutions lie. The divine physician has prescribed solutions, and humanity is stubbornly refusing to adopt and recognize, and busy with its own loud voices that are not at all in harmony. They are in incongruity with the nature of humanity, with the nature of soul, and with the nature of the order and fabric of human civilization. We learn from the Baha'i revelation, as a summary, I summarize it, three main points that I have realized I have learned. One is the eye to observe and discover the source, the origin, the ability to penetrate behind the layers of falsity. So to say, peel the onion layers to go to the core. The ability to discover the inner nature of any form of reality, be it the entire universe itself, religion itself, the fabric of humanity, the nature of the soul, the nature of how a society and a divine world order must operate. So the origination or understanding the origin, that is very important to go into the depth and essences of any realities. That is an eye, an observant eye, penetrating eye that Baha'u'llah trains us and all of humanity. Two, to put the observation and realizations all into a system. So I call it the system-oriented mind. The system-oriented mind never looks at things in a divisive division and looks at all the elements, puts all the myriads of micros, discovers its essences and collects them together in an array and creates a mega macro composed of myriads of micros and the inner relationships of all of these realities. That is what Abdul Baha describes, whether the meaning of true meaning of religion or law or order or natural state, he calls it the essential realities, the essential relationships emanating from the realities of all things. All things, all beings, all exigencies have realities, and the realities have essences, and these essences and these realities are interconnected. This web of realities, observation, is the work of the all-seeing mind and eye. And each Baha'i is to develop that collective mind. That is to know the origin and essences, but also know the inner interoperability or the collectivity, connectivity of all realities. From the limited informations we gather, we see everything in a system-oriented mind. Then we put it in a process-oriented mind. It is the Baha'i writings that has taught us to see all phenomena, all our existence, from its origin and essence to all its interconnected systems, and to see that in a not static way, but in a dynamic way, ever-changing realities, and yet to discover the order even in the process. So to create order out of chaos, to see perfections in the seemingly what we call discorded realities, to find the common denominator of good in all things. Not only to be an independent spirit, not only to be a neutral and ever nourishing to everyone, as in the Baha'i writings it says, justice, to be impartial, but to be supra, to be observant from above and from down, look for a higher order of reality. So we don't not only two-dimensionally look at each other and learn from each other, but collectively always aspire to ideal world that has not yet been established and draw it down and create it in the current world, knowing that each phase and era of the world in comparison to the era before is imperfection, and the future perfect order can be called upon, envisioned, envisaged, preyed upon, brought down ingeniously, and implemented in an orderly fashion. That is, hence, humanity breaks the barriers and finds the realities and creates higher and higher orders. And this is the function of each individual, community, institution, as well as national orders and global systems. So a Baha'i is an aware soul of the origins, aware of all the myriads of phenomena and realities, finds the order in them, draws down the higher order and establishes it and masters it and maneuvers it, and does it with zero self-centeredness and interest. Does it for the greater good of all humanity. The so-called supra becomes inclusive, and inclusive finds the common denominator of good. That is in the Baha'i revelation called the state of perfect maturity. That is, humanity as individuals, as communities, as an order are immature. And the sign of maturity is order out of chaos. So-called from seemingly contradictory things, find unities and order, and we can call harmonies. To harmonize all the seemingly contradictory realities is a sign and manifestation of wisdom and maturity. As individuals, as communities, and as institutions, this is our function and task. Coming to the topic, we are faced with a world that is putting more and more barriers, whereas it has to be off-taking and uplifting all the different barriers.
Yes.
The world envisioned by the Baha'i revelation, as far as the social, economic, and polity and administrative order, is a world that is balanced and coordinated. In fact, fully free and yet regulated. Very interesting. The vocabularies that we discover in the Baha'i literature related to these phenomena themselves show the different sides of reality and themselves collect the seemingly contradictory concepts together in a perfect harmony. The Baha'is, once we learn the process to maturity, we will discover an entire universe and an entire multiverse, an entire, we can say, galaxy of numerous diversified realities now in a very perfect harmony and unison. For example, the concept of economy. The Baha'i revelation, what does it give us a direction and shed light? Before that, I'll give another basically background intro. Do remember that the Baha'i revelation, which consists of Baha'u'llah's writings, Abdul Baha's writings, they culminate in the collections and analysis by Shoghi Effendi. Shoghi Effendi, what he does, he collects the origin, the system, and the process, and puts it with the pen, the description, and the foresight, and a vision that relays it to all the followers of Baha'u'llah and for the bulk of humanity to have a higher and higher and deeper realizations. That is called Shoghi Effendi's description of the world order of Baha'u'llah. In reality, what the humanity to solve its solutions needs are only very few books by Shoghi Effendi. First, to understand the origin of this phenomenon of the new revelation, we need God passes by. The 100-century history of the origins of the promised revelation of all ages, and the implications of all the phenomena, factual, historic, and the awe-inspiring and sacrificing blast of galactic explosion of spiritual energy in every phenomena of it. To understand its phases, to understand its implications for the future divine civilization of humanity, we must know God passes by. Then we must know the promised day is come, the same 100 years. But now from the viewpoint of the phenomena of what happened in the revelation, that's why God has appeared. And God has basically no need for waiting. The era of promise is over, the cycle of fulfillment started, and then the impact of this revelation to humanity and the response or neglect of humanity and the havoc and the disaster and the perilous state of humanity, especially the two world wars, one, two, and the imminent future mega catastrophes ahead, and yet the highest supra world civilization beyond. The dichotomy between the rolling of out, basically phasing out the system of an old world order and the rolling out and its replacement by a new world civilization, divine its origin. Now, with this background, we only need actually one little book among all the books of Shoghi Effendi. So we talked about God passes by, promised day is come, then also the world order of Baha'u'llah, which is a collection of letters. Then we also know there is the advent of divine justice and the citadel of faith. These are the five prominent, most important books of Shoghi Effendi. 5 books give us total picture of the state of affairs of humanity. We will know the origins of where all these processes that are affecting us, like a whirlwind, where it is come from, where it is leading to, and what ultimate outcomes it will have, and how we should place ourselves according to this thrust. And in fact, ride over it, in fact, lend impetus, in fact, shape it and guide it. Therefore, to become the leaders of humanity in humility, in action, in solutions, in applying the medicine, to become the physician, the leaven that leaveneth the destinies of humanity. Now, with that, we come to one book. Only one is good enough. The goal of a new world order written in 1931. 1931, 95 years ago, 96 years ago, 94 years ago. November, end of November. This, a booklet, a letter. It is so filled with clarity on the state of affairs of humanity and all the solutions in it in so much pragmatic, practical ways that it is basically staggering. The goal of the New World Order, the goal of a New World Order. By the way, if you research about the concept of a New World Order, you will find none of the scholars of the world were talking about it. None of them. It started by the Bab, who mentioned, "Blessed is he who discovereth the order of Baha'u'llah and gazes towards it." Then Baha'u'llah in the Aqdas in 1863 mentions the world's equilibrium has been upset by this, and he calls it the wondrous New World Order. It is Shoghi Effendi that starts from 1924. By 1931 and then 1936, he outlines and reveals, and you can say propels into the world the entire concept that there is a new world order, that is a new world civilization, a new world, what we call it, divine origin, not what today the world negatively conceives of a new world order. Until this has been given through Barbara Bush, through Mildred Motahede, to George Bush Sr., who puts the book, The World Order of Baha'u'llah, next to his bed and reads it.
Wow.
And of course, eclectically collects from it partially and very much distortedly. And therefore, it creates a new world order, meaning only the political order of the West. Although the good elements of it exist, but it becomes negative. We have to be aware of all of that. And yet, the world scholars, I have researched, started after 1940s and World War, any mention of the concept of a new world order. This is one of the concepts that did not exist in the literature of humanity until the Bab, then Baha'u'llah, then Abdul Baha, and then Shoghi Effendi basically took it out of its embryonic form and delineated the twin processes of the death pangs of an old world order and the birth signs of a new world civilization. And he talks about how and what led to the World War I, World War II, how the seeds of the contradictions of them not correctly arrayed are still propelling humanity towards a third world catastrophe of undreamt of dimensions, and praying that we will mitigate the disaster and the destruction that we may observe, and we are in the middle of it, and yet there will be an eye of the storm and a peak of the storm, and how beyond that the collective maturity of humanity will be established. With that background, in this book, Shoghi Effendi describes not only the causes of the wars and the forces of it and the solutions, and he also impassionately describes it in the economic terms and in the geopolitical terms, and yet into the mental and into the spiritual realities. So it is very important to understand that he's talking about layers of that. On the level of the economy, obviously Shoghi Effendi uses terms that in reality we call economic order of the world needs to have total free flow of goods, of capital, and of even human capital. So-called no barriers, no borders. there is no justification for actually any tariffs. Whereas in the Baha'i writings, we see clearly not only the signs, but also the order of taxation. And we see Abdul Baha's descriptions of the taxations, even especially on the rural area and not a national area. And also a fabric for what we call a welfare society, not collected into the centralized where everyone on it that are names that are dead for 150 years and they are collecting monies. What the US is facing, Abdul Baha had solved it 120 years ago. That this welfare should be in the rural village area and then township, and not a national and supra and too much centralized level. This is one of those that is the grassroots solution. But taxation, including negative taxation, were introduced by Abdul Baha. And a concept that I name it, the poverty floor and richness ceiling. There is no model of creating egalitarian, total, unitarian, equal society. That is deemed by the Baha'i revelation as unfair and unequal, because there are two forms of injustice, the visible and the invisible. If two people are the same and you treat them differently, this is called the visible injustice. Obviously, they are all the same talents, the same contributions. Why are you prejudicing and preferring a white over a black, or, for that matter, a man over a woman, and this and that? Or somebody who is human and you slave them. This is obviously injustice, gross injustice. In the economic order or class society, the Baha'i faith says, yes, two equal contributions cannot be mistreated unequally. But the reverse also applies. The invisible, this is what Karl Marx was blind, was limited, and therefore did not see. And Abdul Baha saw. How about the realities that are different by their nature and essence? Their level of contribution and capacities are different, and they are treated egalitarian way. No. It's as unfair as the other one, except that that was so obvious and visible, only the, sorry to say, stupid only observe that. Whereas the invisible, the wise observe also injustice. Therefore, there is no way to take the creative forces of production and also give it to the state and create egalitarian, everybody on the same salary, in fact, a coupon economy. So disastrous that destroyed creativity and created such an unfairness and injustice that destroyed at least half a century of the experience of humanity. In Russia, in China, and in many other countries, Khmer Rouge of even Latin America, Nicaragua, everywhere. It was the largest movement in the history of human civilization, the largest in population and the most disastrous order so far seen by humanity. Worse than World War I and World War II put together, only in one country of China. China had 30 million deaths, either killed during the Cultural Revolution, or in the revolution, or by the wrong policies of economy of this egalitarian system that it created so much famine and death. 30 million people died, larger than the total population death of World War I, World War II put together. So when the Chinese start being prejudiced against Japanese, I always correct them, balance them, sit in your place. You Chinese killed more Chinese than the Japanese killed you. Yes, granted, historically, the World War II took place, and they also have to be apologetic, but you also don't just take and perpetuate this hatred. So Baha'is are the balancers and equalizers of the world of humanity. We have to see it with the eye of the system-oriented mind, process-oriented mind, and origins, and the ultimate solutions. Now, the order of economy of communism and socialism was totally faulty because it assumes all humans are equal in every aspect, including the soul and nature and capacities. Wrong. Abdul Baha says no two atoms of the universe are the same. Therefore, treat them equally, and you have totally gross injustice. And yet, you cannot let them be free economy. So, therefore, the basically total freelance economy, free market of Adam Smith, that is the invisible hand that will balance the markets. And even that, I wrote an article, no, it doesn't balance that invisible hand of ruthless market freedom. It actually chokes the two hands. Why? Because it goes through a lot of pushing for profit. And all the advertisements are at profit and maximization of self-interest. As if every nation, every individual, every company maximizing self-interest creates a balancer automatically. No, it doesn't. That's why Shoghi Effendi says that the markets need to be coordinated, need to be regulated, but cannot be over-controlled. And for sure, though there are taxations and negative taxations for balancer effect, so that there is no extremes of wealth accumulated in the hands of few, and so many sub-poverty among individuals and nations, so that humanity is in the dire disaster of starvation. Up to today, the statistics try to show the picture beautifully, but the reality is not what they say. Don't believe in the statistics in these media. Humanity is still 80% in the rural area and in abject poverty. And it needs to have a total poverty eradication in one lifetime. Not poverty amelioration, no. Total poverty eradication. By not only the spiritual and the giveaway, not only the Baha'i concept of preferring others to yourselves, but by social order, mechanisms, modelings, I call it superior economic formulas and modelings, creating automatic total poverty eradication. An exercise that I exercised quietly behind the scenes, below, and yet affecting a process and a model throughout the entirety of China, where a nation of the sub-poverty at the brink of starvation, where they were going as large refugees to even North Korea, and they were dying in the villages, all of a sudden became a community of not only 800 billionaires and 10,000 millionaires, but also a majority mid-cap society and close to zero poverty, at least the extremes. How the same reality can be now applied to Africa, where we are deeply involved and thoroughly involved, and the process will mature through modeling, for which just 2 months ago in Spain, I won the leading award among 500 royal families of Europe and tons of tycoons and billionaires, whom, with all the greatness and all the altruism and humanitarian, have not done this because it is not individual giveaways that alleviates or totally eradicates poverty. It is superior economic combined with spiritual modeling, the elements of which requires another presentation, but I will touch upon. So minimum, we will have differentiation. We allow for creativity and capacity differentiation to play themselves and create different levels of wealth, but pro rata, that nobody ends up with the short end of the stick. The gain of one is not the total loss of another, but a collective with a room to play. But there will be a mechanism that poverty will not be below subsistence, and wealth will not be inordinately so high that it is useless and also worthless, and it is only number in the accounts that even the owner cannot use it, and in fact it destroys the owners. Why? Because so much injustice that we will see the phenomena of the poor areas of Los Angeles attacking a few times, setting on fire even Beverly Hills. And we will see that how this will, what we call, wreak havoc upon the entire civilization of the North American continent. And it is bound to happen in the future, and the developed world in the Europe also. And how Shoghi Effendi says that the world is not immune. It is the crass materialism created in Europe, carried to excess to North American continent, and brought to the Asiatic and African continents, just like the ugly octopussy and protruding its ugly features and its tentacles, and basically wrapping the entire humanity and pulling down the wealth of the nations and creating a few wealthy that don't benefit themselves nor give the benefit to others. And how it doesn't have to be that way. A mechanism of embedded benevolence, a mechanism of economic modeling and policies and systems will be able to create that balancer. One element is there is this taxation, and we call it negative taxation. That is only in situation where the poorest of the poor work hard and are given the opportunity, and yet still they cannot meet the minimum needs of family, then the community has to come to assistance, not to create the culture of reliance and giveaways, but temporary relief and the culture of independence creation. Therefore, it is called not even sustainable economy, but regenerative and spiral way up economy, that the receiver becomes the giver in the future and becomes creative and not permanently become a caste. Therefore, work is worship is as important as if there is a needy and the poor are my trust among you. Heed their crying needs and make aware the poor, the rich of the crying needs of the midnight sighing of the poor, so that the rich will not be in ignorance, in destruction, in annihilation. Wow, beautiful sentences of hidden words of Baha'u'llah. How we will see the balancer effect. And how this taxation is both minimum for the government to do the greater good, but or the collective consultation, or in the future the local houses of justice, and they will have the sources of revenue and the sources of expenditure, and also the needy will be taken care of, the ill and the ailing will be taken care of around the houses of worship. Again, spirituality and practicality. Again, this system-oriented mind and process, and yet not permanently. And then aside from taxation, for the flow of goods and humanity, no borders, although the Baha'i faith never says destroy the borders and nations. It never says that the national system should totally be eradicated and we can call it destroyed. No. The Baha'i faith understands the hierarchies that are not repressive or controlling. From the social fabric of family, clan, tribe, village, city, to nation, but says nation building has come to its end, to its climax. And a world that is maturing and the world that is facing the havoc must abandon the fetish and the deity of nationalism and militant nationalism. Create a world order that is universal, global, with the elements of collective security, world judiciary and world legislative abilities, and world collective consultation, where all the grudges of humanity are heard and unpacked, a world pact created, and then the collective forces of humanity create collective security. That is over 100 years ago. From 1950s, you can see the seeds of it. 1963, the book of Holy Book. 1973, the tablets to the kings, and 1968 to 73, maturing, the entire order of a future world civilization revealed in detail. Few decades before World War I and before World War II, mentioning the seat of that disaster, the Berlin, the sighing of the Berlin, the fires of disaster, the World War I, World War II, by name, by location, and we hear the lamentation of Berlin, though it be in conspicuous glory. The prisoner of Akka. Humanity entirety must bow down before this revelation, must draw down all the inspirations from this revelation. On the other hand, this is the only revelation that says wealth is good. It is written, man is in need of knowledge. Man is in need of perception to know what leads to its exaltation and what leads to the debasement. Man is in need of a deciphering capacity. What will elevate the station of humanity and what degrades the station of humanity? Having attained this stage of maturity, man is in need of wealth. Wealth is praiseworthy, wealth is needed, wealth must be generated, not handed down over. Wealth must be a source mentality, that nobody comes and gives you the wealth. You create it, you generate it, you multiply it, and you distribute it, and you create excess of it, and you export it to the needy and to the other nations. Therefore, a country of China that was a beggar nation, and China was the beggar nation on any level, individuals and collectively and a nation, all of a sudden received so many loans from other countries, all of a sudden become super wealthy and becomes the issuers of outbound debt. The same phenomena that I have now trained and taught over 30 African presidents, not only presidents, one by one, president, prime minister, the chairman of National Assembly, the legislation, all the heart, the core, Minister of Finance, Governor of Central Bank, Governor of Digitalization, Minister of Digitalization, Minister of National Planning Commission, and all the asset and wealth producer ministries. Then the private economy, then the national assets that are majority in all of the world. They are companies of nations owned by federal governments, and they represent 80% of the assets and wealth of the nations, and 90% of them are in the red, and they are destructive rather than productive. They are the sources of corruption, and also the markets are not coordinated, the markets are not annexed to them, and therefore they are suffering from mismanagement, lack of market penetration, and lack of incentive for ownership, and therefore they become the drawing of milking from the state, which means the money of the poor. How this should be systematically reversed without force or coercion, This is the differentiation of the Baha'i faith to all the other orders, that by hatred, indignation, anger, try to create an economic justice and a global justice, and that fails and fails and fails.
Wow.
How, therefore, we have created the movement of the collective, peaceful rise of Africa. Collective, because it's in the Baha'i writings. Peaceful, because it is the methodologies of the Baha'i faith. Never anger, never indignation, never militant. And yet, soft power, more powerful than harsh power. Through the models of collective wealth generation, source mentality, what I call convert, merge, integrate, aggregate. Capitalize, monetize, digitalize, multiply, surplus, distribute, surplus, export. That's why 5 African nations are working on, based on our model, to create wealth, to issue outbound foreign debt to Europe. Game over. That's why the wealth of the nation creation must have automatic mechanism of distribution on a fair, equitable manner. If you wait unequally to create wealth and given to the wealthy and the poor left out, and you do not include them, it is difficult to get it back. Whereas before and while the wealth is generated, you have mechanism that it distributes it simultaneously. I called it in my lectures in China among 5,000 Chinese national leaders 25 years ago. Chairman Li Nonghe remembers it. And I called it, we have learned from the Baha'i revelation, generate wealth with one hand and distribute it with the other hand at the same time, seamlessly, automatically, naturally. No need for extreme, what we call it, hoarding of wealth. That is a sign of weakness and fear, an exaggerated fear of loss, the number one plague of humanity. How spiritual solutions to the economic problems, which are the angles? We talk about it. 180 years or 150 years, we know it, but we don't look at all the different angles of that. One of the key angles, blind spots of humanity, the fear factor. Therefore, the need to herd even capital. Fearing someday I will be in a big loss. Some other blind spots of humanity, also fear factor. Fear factor of being, again, cheated and tricked. Therefore, I better be smarter and I cheat and trick others. So many blind spots of humanity, but there are not many, only 20. Discover and recover. Now back to economic order. And I am getting to see what hours it is.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I will finish in a few minutes. Apologies.
Perfect.
So back to the economic order, because there is an order in that chaos. So while there is taxation and negative taxation for the balancer effect, but not given to a central and unhumane and unknowledgeable to distribute only on paper and misuse and abuse, but on the grassroots level. But also a mechanism of free flow of goods and no tariffs or zero tariffs, but yet coordinated markets. It is very important to take the words of Shoghi Effendi and to understand. So while there is no, what we call it, taxation, tariffs between countries, because that is not taxation. But yet there is, the order needs to be in place. Let me read that one. Okay, let me come to what I discovered here. This Commonwealth of the future, and then that is what Shoghi Effendi writes it in the goal of the New World Order. This Commonwealth must, as far as we can visualize it, consist of a world legislature whose members will, as the trustees of the whole of mankind, ultimately control the entire resources of all component nations. So all the resources have to be inventory taken and need to be in the control and management of a world commonwealth whose leaders are collective and they are not owners, but they are the managers and trustees on behalf of humanity. And yet will enact such laws that shall be required to regulate the life, satisfy the needs, and adjust the relationships of all races and peoples. So we have the balancer effect through legislation and regulation, and not over-regulation, because somewhere else, Shogi Effendi says the excessive of over-centralization also must be avoided. Now we go to another where the same similar vocabulary will appear. Before saying that national rivalries, hatreds, and intrigues will cease, he says that where the economic resources of the world will be organized, its sources of raw materials will be tapped and fully utilized, not to say, oh, because of the world environment problem and green, don't develop oil and gas, don't develop mining. No. That is extremes of the non-Baha'i world. The Baha'is do utilize the resources in a regulated and regular and orderly manner, and in a replenishable manner, unleashing the creativity of humanities to clean the environment while utilizing, and not the extreme, the one or other. If you say the revelation of Baha'u'llah is the revelation of collective maturity, this is where it exists. Back to my first realization of principles. You don't go to extremes, even in our approach of the treatment of the resources. They will be organized, its sources of raw materials will be tapped and fully utilized, not partially. Its markets will be coordinated and developed, developing the markets. And the distribution of its products will be equitably regulated. So the distribution regulation is different than tariffs. It is information management of, we call it regional specialization, so that redundancies will not be there, and so that shortages and also oversupplies will not be there. But the free flow of the goods are, again, Shogi Effendi says how the basically protectionism of tariffs, he uses the word tariffs, is detrimental and unhealthy to the free flow of goods and services, and for that matter, capital. I think there is a lot more, we can call it not just knowledge, but wisdom. We will see, therefore, in the Baha'i economy, tariffs and barriers in the borders don't exist, the same as passports will not exist, visas will not exist, but information of who is who and where they are going could be existing. The crime will be managed many ways, but not borders, and not on what do we call it, tariffs, to the point that they will be creating burden over the price. One element which is very interesting, for example, one of the reasons, for example, how the US just backed out away, how Trump just backed away from putting tariffs on China. They went so high and then all of a sudden took out on electronic and electrics, because their own goods produced in China are so cheap. Production of an apple is no more than $25 costs. it is being sold as $1,600, $800. Who is basically taking away the money of the poor through the form of a product, albeit the technology is needed. The company Apple that created it needs its own fair share of profit, but not like this.
Yeah.
The country's tariffs and the pricings and the flow of where the labor force is and the abuse of the labor and all the regulation of the labor, all of these elements have to be reviewed in a collective manner to create a fair, equitable system that generates mega wealth and yet will distribute it relatively, not egalitarian, but relatively orderly. That's what we call nobody ends up with the short end of the stick. Everybody's profits and benefits multiplies and increases, and yet not equally. There is room for creativity and room for rights of the productivity or IPs, but not indefinitely and irregularly and concentrated and condensed in iconic brands and institutions who are no longer creative and productive, equal to the same brand with 1% of the cost can be produced, and that people are not benefiting from it. So the abundance economy, the regulation of production, the information technology, AI, and the material science and nanometric, so that the life of goods, a tire instead of 10 years can have 100 years of history.
Right.
A glass, instead of breaking down 2 years, it will have 200 years that cannot break. So you don't need to produce so much. Production itself can be reduced by 95%, 98%. No need so many creativity of labor go to material production, but to go to mental and spiritual discoveries of the inner soul and the secrets and mysteries of the human telepathy, human discovery of the unknown. Not that we are using the capacity of our brain by 3%. No, not even 0.00001%. So all those discoveries, then the Shoghi Effendi writes it. This is not my words. But after the unifying planetary order, 2 areas, extraplanetary and inner reality of the human soul's discoveries have to be the focus of the future revelations that will come after the revelation of Baha'u'llah.
Thank you.
Thank you. For now, we pause.
Thank you so much, Farzam Jan. I cannot thank you enough. I'm sure other folks who are here cannot thank you enough. On behalf of everyone, please take care of yourself, and we hope to see you sometime, maybe physically, somewhere on this planet.